Good evening and welcome to Gaming Ballistic's Firing Squad, a new title. Today, Leonard Balsera has agreed to join me to talk about games. I'd say I'm not too big on lengthy monologues for introduction, but I'm not going to, so we'll get right to it. Looking at the various sources, I'm going to give you a chance to talk about your resume a little bit. It looks like you've done work for Pelgrane, Gumshoe System, and then lead design contribution on several major Fate releases, including Pulp Goodness and Spirit of the Century. Lead design for the Dresden Files RPG, which I just downloaded yesterday to look at it, as well as lead system development for the Fate Core system. And now I guess you're working with Margaret Weiss Cortex Plus. So what else am I missing?
I've designed cards for a couple of Munchkin releases. That's about it.
Yeah, it's you may work for Evil Hat, but you seem to wear many hats. Some of them are evil, and some of them are just odd.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to get hired by Steve Jackson Games full-time a couple of Januaries ago now, and so I've been with them for a while, and it's very cool.
No, I believe it. Steve Jackson Games is at least fun to write for, in a minor capacity, at least in my case, and certainly I love interacting with Sean and those guys, and Steven as well. So,
yeah.
Do you run your own games as well as design them, or as Sean Punch would say, do you eat your own dog food?
I try not to run Fate as much these days. I'm like, a lot of what happened with Core is that other games that I was running and playing that were not Fate ended up influencing Fate. Like, I believe that it's important to not be stagnant, right, as a designer, and to consume as wide a variety of other stuff as possible. So, so I try to sort of keep pushing my own comfort zone and stuff like that. So,
what systems do you play?
Right now I'm actually just got started my weekly group. I'm starting a weekly group to do a Trail of Cthulhu campaign. So that's Gumshoe, which is something that I've worked on, but like, I didn't design Gumshoe, right? So like, it's in the clear of things that don't feel like work.
Right.
I play. I've had a Primetime Adventures game going for a while. I don't know if you're familiar with Matt Wilson's Primetime Adventures, but it's an indie chestnut. I've been playing a lot of the various Apocalypse World engine variants, like Dungeon World and Monster Hearts and Tremulous and that kind of stuff. So I'm just trying to keep abreast of all the stuff that everyone is doing. But I mean, yeah, like I'll run Fate at the drop of a hat if someone wants me to, right?
Probably like coming home.
Yeah.
So one thing that I do notice, Fate, Gumshoe, dramatic role-playing, I'm kind of detecting a bit of a theme in terms of the kind of system work you like to do. On the other hand, you just said you like to be eclectic. So it seems like heavy on plot development and storytelling, light on what we might refer to as endless lists of stats for guns. So do you think that that's accurate in how you like to both play and write? And why is that important to you?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I always say when I'm talking on forums or whatever is that my biases are very well documented, and by that I mean I've made them and published them. So like, yeah, I mean, there is a general theme in the work that I like to do of shaping the conversation at the table more by manipulating fiction than by manipulating sort of a virtual Rube Goldberg device, right?
Right.
So yeah, I'm less interested in how fast can this person moving across this parking lot at this speed, how likely is it that they can shoot at this other person who's running at this speed, and and diving for cover that covers this much of their body and this, that, and the other, right? Like, I don't knock that stuff. And like, certainly it takes a lot of intestinal fortitude, cleverness, grit, and wherewithal to put together something that handles all those variables. But I'm better at manipulating fiction and the processes of fiction with game mechanics than I am in doing that stuff because, you know, I come from a theater background and there are various other reasons.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, no, you must have let out a either a silent or audible cheer when, if you've seen it, the interviews with J. Michael Straczynski in Babylon 5, how fast does the White Star move? And he moves at the speed of plot.
The speed of plot.
Right, which fits in with it. It takes just as long to get from place A to place B as to make it really cool, and there's a reason why timers either stop at 1 second or 007 seconds, depending on what movie you're in.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So what do you think of the strengths of that sort of dramatic, serve the plot, right as if you'd be writing fiction or playing in fiction? What are the strengths of that that compels the wrong word, but they are compelling?
No pun intended, right?
There you go. Oh, actually, you're right. I'm not. I've played in a couple of Fate games, but as guest, like I was a Indian help desk operator, and so they're just like, yeah, you're this guy, put on a bad accent and do this. And so I didn't really have any rules to go with. It was more improvisational theater.
You were in a Fate game where you were playing a help desk operator?
Yes, I was.
That's phenomenal. I wanna know about that game.
It was John Henry's Fate game, and I dropped by to participate, and they're like, hey, I dropped by to watch and to try, because I supported the Fate Kickstarter, you can see, under my...
Right.
And so I was interested in this because I had been directed to it by Anthony Ten Monros, who...
Yeah.
Yep, so you know Anthony. He was like, this is great, it's really interesting, it's very different than GURPS, and you should take a look at it. And so I did, and I was interested, and I supported it, and so I showed up at this to see what I was getting into. And they're like, oh, we have need of a bit part, how long do you have? I'm like...
so it was an NPC you were playing.
Yeah, I was playing an NPC, yep.
Okay, cool, yeah.
And so, you know, I played the role of someone who was interacting with some soldier of fortune who was trying to figure out how to use parts from some obviously stolen, dangerous device. and so I was, you know, happy to help, but I was like, so you're trying to tell me that, and I won't do the Indian accent because I'm bad at it, but it was funny. So you're trying to tell me that you have a part with no serial number, or maybe it was filed off, you don't have a manual, and you can't really tell me where you got it. Well, let me help you right out with that, sir.
Right, yeah.
But it was good.
That's funny. Yeah. I like that. To actually answer your question.
Sure.
So I think that the strengths of what I sort of loop it all into like a term. I call it fiction forward gaming, right? Which is where the mechanics are sort of transparently about manipulating the fiction, as opposed to like trying to construct a virtual world or whatever. Although that's a little bit of a trap, but I don't know if we're going to get into that or not. But that's a little bit of a trap.
We're going to get into it now because I can't leave a lead in like that alone.
One of the strengths is accessibility, because I think it's easier to get people into the hobby if you talk to them about making shared fiction together and messing around with shared fiction, and you can point to sort of touchstones and what they've experienced in books and other media. So like, hey, you know, when you're watching this TV show and like there's always like the dramatic reversal when you get to this point of tension. So this mechanic is supposed to bring out that dramatic reversal like you've seen in these TV shows you watched. And I think that people tend to get into that more instinctively, because everybody is exposed to media. We all watch movies, we all watch television, we all read books. And I'm very interested in the potential for accessibility for acquisition in RPG design, right? Like I'm more interested in more people getting into what we do.
Right. No, I agree. It's I've had a similar conversation with people who are into martial arts. You can't see my shirt, but I'm wearing a rah rah Hwarang Do Dojan T-shirt,
Oh, cool.
and people are like, hey, Taekwondo or Hapkido or Hwarang Do. I'm like, until everyone is as into martial arts as they are to Monday Night Football, until
Right.
everyone is into role playing as they are to Monday Night Football, and fantasy football is role playing for jocks, but we can get into that later.
Yeah.
But until it has that cash or cachet, beating each other up about what system is coolest is really doing everybody a disservice.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's that. There's accessibility, and I think that probably one of the other biggest strengths of it is that, as part of that whole idea that the conversation about fiction is easier to have than the conversation about, let us say, weights and measurements and distances, right?
Sure.
Because that conversation is easier to have, a wider range of texture is available to you. I think when you play RPGs that are more fiction forward, right? Like if we want to have an experience that's a horror experience, if we want a particular kind of fiction, the distance from wanting that to getting it is maybe a little shorter when you're talking about fiction forward designs, right? Because all you have to do is identify how does that fiction work, right, and then build around it, right? I think that it's perhaps a little bit, it's easier to manage those expectations and see them to fruition when you have that kind of a priority.
I think. Sorry, please continue.
It's in summary, it's easier to hit your aesthetic goals, right? Easier.
No, I agree. I think that, for example, obviously the theme of my blog is gaming Ballistic, right? Because I was like one of the GURPS firearms guys.
Right.
And wrote kind of an infamous article and then followed it up with an even more infamous article about bows and arrows, which consumed 11,000 words in Stephen Marsh's soul.
Yeah.
But the thing is that if I'm going to start a conversation about that, I don't want to have to talk to, although my wife is a shooter too, she doesn't care about how many PSI or the cartridge or the this.
Yeah.
She wants to know how many little holes she put in the target, and they are many and tightly grouped.
Yeah.
So that's, in a way, a fiction-forward approach to gunplay. It's
right.
And what's the point of it? And it makes a lot of sense. And you don't need to know how a gun works in order to have it be cool. You don't need to know how to do a bootlegger reverse in order to have a cool car chase. What you need to do is have the tension. And it's funny because I very recently had to explain to my almost 4-year-old daughter that the reason she's scared during the TV show is that the shows are not fun without tension and conflict.
Right.
Don't worry, Superman's going to win.
Right.
If it's a cakewalk, you're going to be bored.
Right.
And it's funny, though, how that concept has to be explained at least at an early age, and then it has to be reinforced in order to make things fun.
Right.
And the fun is the key. So what do you think are the good or valid criticisms? And maybe this gets into your sounded like the trap between simulation and fiction forward, but what do you think are the valid criticisms of designing in a way that's fiction forward, as you say?
Well, I think that the valid criticism, I think it is some of what we've brought up before, right? Like you just said it, right? Like for people who are looking to get a specific aesthetic effect, you don't need to know all these details, right?
Yep.
But some people do want to know that. I mean, the criticism is that the preferences that people have, the desires that people have for the medium are diverse, right? I'll give you an example. So I had a great GURPS Swashbucklers game once that was basically the GM did a lot of research on Francis Drake and the expeditions of Francis Drake, and we were all playing as people who were press ganged basically into serving on one of Drake's ships, and then ended up sort of rising up from the rest of the crew to become his confidants and join in on his explorations of the world, and his voyages to circumnavigate the world and all that stuff, right? And getting involved in the politics at court and stuff like that. And he did a tremendous amount of historical research for this game, and he checked out books in the library and books from his own personal collection, that collected logs and stuff from Drake's voyages, and he made scenarios that were based on the specific incidents that were described in the logs. I mean, he put a lot of historicity in the game, and arguably speaking, for that game, GURPS, with its capacity to handle well-researched subjects, was the perfect system for that game, right? Because that was a game where, because we were engaging in history, we did kind of want to have a sense of if a ship, a brigandine that was armed like thus, went up against a man of war that was armed like thus, right? Under these conditions, what would occur, right?
This is how many splinters the brigandine would be in at the end of that.
Right, or whatever, and like, what are the conditions, right, that maybe we could manipulate the environment to make X, Y, and Z go down, right? Like, there are times where you engage in, like I said, sort of the Rube Goldberg device nature of like the virtual world. I think that fiction-forward RPGs are becoming more popular in that regard because nowadays computers do that kind of calculation a lot better.
That's a really good point, I think.
And that's just a personal theory of mine. Like, I don't have any data to back that up, but I can tell you that without that that sense of here's the parameters of the world that is sort of built up by the mechanics, and our agreement to invest in that, I don't think that campaign, I don't know if that campaign would have been as fulfilling or felt as authentic if it were done with something like Fate. Because what GURPS forced us to do was get into the details. It communicated a sense of authenticity about investing in that period in time. And I think that, like, GURPS specifically is very good at that, right, of getting you to invest in the authenticity of a subject, right? And they're, the books are known for that. They're known for their research and their engagement with whatever topic it is that the particular book is covering, right? Like Lisa Steele's GURPS Cops.
Her Cops book, yeah.
Yeah, is I have used it in fiction work because even as a work of reference, right? Like it is fantastic, right? And like fiction forward games, I think, can sometimes falter when you're worried about like the authenticity of presenting a particular thing. I have not seen the fiction forward CSI role-playing game, right? And probably the reason why I haven't seen that is because in order to do procedural procedural cop show at that level of detail, you kind of need to be a medical examiner or you sound like an idiot, right?
Sure.
And CSI takes a lot of liberties with, like, I'm not calling CSI an authoritative source for forensic information by any means, right? But they have an advisor, at least, right?
Who they occasionally listen to.
Right, who they occasionally listen to. So and certainly it's possible to do that kind of research before you step into a Fate game. Like we have, like, Fight Fire is one of our campaigns in Worlds on Fire in one of our Fate setting releases, and that was done by Jason Morningstar, who has a tremendous amount of institutional experience with firefighting, and so that comes across authentically because he provided that research, right? But sometimes in a particular group, like you have less of an ability to rely on the system to give you those things, right? You have to bring more of that yourself, right? So that can be challenging.
Yeah, and I actually had a campaign go, or a scenario that I later tried to sell, and that's an entirely new story. But I had a scenario go almost completely off the rails. I was game mastering a Black Ops game. Black Ops, 1,000-point third edition characters, or sorry, 700-point third edition characters. They translate to about 1,000 points in fourth edition. But it was a gritty, quote unquote, a gritty Black Ops game because I wanted to try that out. And I had given the players suppressors, silencers for their weapons.
Right.
And they were expecting Hollywood suppressors.
Right.
And the sniper of the group had a 300 Winchester Magnum rifle. It's a gun that when you pull the trigger, your shoulder goes into the next.
Right. Yeah.
And you can hear it for 10 miles. Right. It's just an explosion. And most suppressors will reduce that from excruciatingly loud to merely loud. But they were expecting, you put this little thing on the end of the rifle and you go pew pew pew, like
Right.
And that's all you hear. And
Right.
when they fired off these silenced bullets in the middle of an enemy base,
right,
everybody heard them. They were really, really pissed at me.
Right.
Because their expectations about what the game was and my expectations about verisimilitude didn't match up. And that's kind of a counterexample when that would have been, and maybe Black Ops is best as a Fate game. Because it's about the drama and it's about the struggle, whereas, the other piece of that when the details are wrong and it just jars is there was a recent episode of, what was I watching? Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Mm-hmm.
Where the guy grabs a double-barreled shotgun and the sound effects guys felt compelled to make that cocking noise, and everyone who's ever used any gun just went,
yeah.
And it's that moment of, oh, well, that doesn't work with the game. And in your Francis Drake campaign, it sounds like as long as you were willing to work within the idiom of the history, you got immersion. And I think the immersion is the key that either the detail or it's the speed of plot can provide.
Right. So this is where the trap comes in, right? Like you just articulated the trap, and the trap is that like the core truth of any experience in an RPG is that nothing happens at the table without the buy-in and the consensus of all of the people at the table. And anybody who tells you differently is trying to sell you something, probably their role-playing game. And even if you have sort of this agreed upon, this set of mechanics governs like these realistic, quote, realistic, unquote, whatever variables in this situation, yada, 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 right? The truth of the matter is always going to be that if the system produces a result that you don't buy into, you're going to protest against it. And if your expectations are too far from what that realism actually is or whatever, you're going to balk at it, right? And then all of a sudden you have disagreements and problems and yada yada yada, right? So that's why it's a trap, because if thinking that your design needs to spell out all of these variables, these sort of world in motion variables, pseudo-physics I call it, in order to be believable, or because you need that in order for everybody to accept the reality of the game, that's a trap, and I consider it patently false, right? Like, you would sometimes get more realistic results if you're playing a fiction-forward game with a sniper who is actually a sniper in real life, right? Like, that guy will tell you all kinds of stuff. He'll justify all kinds of results in the game by telling you stuff about bullet trajectories and what happens to shooters in certain wind conditions and yada, yada, yada. Like, more detail that comes from their experience than a system, even a detailed system that's supposed to be modeling those variables, can provide, right? Like, real life is more complex than any game's approximation of real life. So I think that both approaches have their strengths, right? But I certainly would not suggest that, like, one solves problems that the other fails to solve, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and you know, the interesting thing to me, at least, is there are cases, and I'll pick on Gumshoe a little bit because I was recently involved in the Gumshoe campaign.
Cool.
And Trail of Cthulhu, as a matter of fact, and actually my next interview is Ken Hite, so I'll be talking to him about this a little bit.
About Night's Black Agents, hopefully. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, this one was it was going to be a prequel, but then we were going to get into the forward, but I had to drop out for various reasons. But the thing that grated me a little bit about the system, I actually thought that the concept of investigative skills was and is brilliant, because the premise behind them is exactly correct. In fiction, you get the clues. It's what you do with them that matters. Where I had a problem, and it struck me a little funny, was that, for example, my character was a doctor, and so he had a lot of points in first aid. There wasn't really a doctor skill that was surgery and stuff. There was investigative parts, but not really. But after I used a couple of points of first aid, I was no better than some schmo off the street with first aid 0.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, that really, I should always be a little bit better, but should occasionally, a couple times a game, have the opportunity to be brilliant. And so the fact that I had a limited number of bandages that I could put on, and then I was no better than an untrained guy, bugged me enough that I started suggesting, as I always do, alternate mechanics, and that wasn't always taken as well as I would have liked. But that was the thing, is that the mechanics interfered with a little bit with the storytelling in that particular case, and that was, I think, in the trap level where you couldn't quite enact the character as you'd like. It was, but the how to solve mysteries was brilliant. It's just when you came into something you needed to roll dice against, that, you know, it was sometimes a little awkward. Sure. But let me return to the topic a little bit of complexity, because I actually got into a discussion about this on my blog, because I had posted something that was deliberately inflammatory and said, GURPS is not complex, it's just detailed. And I got wonderful responses to that, because when you say GURPS is not complex, people like to beat on you, and with some justification, I think. But
see, I would actually agree with you. I don't actually think that GURPS is that complex. I think it just has a high barrier to entry. I was actually having a conversation about this today. Once you've made your character in GURPS, things simplify a great deal. It's the fact that making your character requires the process that it requires.
And a computer.
That all of the complexity is front-loaded.
Yes.
Like, once you've got it all down on paper and you understand what it all does, and then you actually get into the meat of the game, things simplify a great deal. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I know. I think it's a good point, and it leads into the question that because one of the things that was pointed out is GURPS is 550 pages long plus the material.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's complex. And I was looking at Dresden Files, which is a fate book.
Yeah.
Which is supposed to be, you know, it's fiction forward and it's rules light and whatever. Or maybe it's perceived as rules light, but it's 700 pages of material in the 2 volumes, and 418 of them are character driven. Another 274 describe the world.
Right.
And since I've read all 12 or 13 or 14 Dresden Files novels, it's not like I'm not invested in it already, so I'm certainly going to dig in. You know, and Pathfinder is nearly 600 pages.
Yeah.
Fate Core is remarkably terse, laconic, if we want to use that, to go back there, at 300. So at 300 pages, and you know, so complexity, depth. What is there a tie between the length of a rule set and complexity?
Um, I'm gonna cheat a little bit and say that I think complexity is a moving target. Um, and that I would hesitate to make a concrete association, to make a concrete assumption about that, right? Because well, all right, so Primetime Adventures, right? You can go get the Primetime Adventures PDF. I think Indie Press Revolution is still carrying it, and I don't know where else you can get it, but that game I think is 80, 90 pages, 6x9. It's a booklet. It's not quite twice as long as Fate Accelerated, right?
Sure.
The game has one stat.
Really?
Right? Yeah, it has how your screen presence. The goal of Primetime Adventures is to make the greatest television show that never was.
Okay.
And your character has one stat, and the stat is the measurement of how much the issue that they're struggling with that season matters in that episode. It's called screen presence. So when it's at 3, which is the highest it can be, it's your spotlight episode, and that episode is all about you confronting the issue that you're facing that season. When it's 1, your issue is not on camera, and you're going to be focused more on plot stuff and getting things done or whatever. I know people who find that game extremely taxing and difficult to run, and complex in that it requires you to do a lot of work to shape the collective story of an episode. Like, it offloads a lot of narrative responsibility onto the player, right? And the process of participating fully in the creation of that shared fiction is a complex process for some people, right? The rules are not complex per se. They're not procedurally complex, but procedural complexity is not the only form of complexity that is in a game design, right?
Sure.
So I would say that there's a direct correlation between the thickness of a book, probably, and the procedural complexity of the game. But I would be wary of making blanket assumptions in that regard. Dresden Files is a good example. That second book is really just a fan encyclopedia of stuff from it was like the current state of the Dresden Files as of Small Favor, and all the people in it and all the monsters in it and stuff like that. And it had stat blocks, yes, but the core of that text was sort of a fan reference to all the stuff that was in the Dresden Files. So I would not say that was complex, or that had procedural complexity as far as the game was concerned, because it was 400 pages, or whatever, of prose,
sure.
Effectively speaking,
sure.
of prose. So I think that might be possible, right? It might be possible to have a game that's like, here's your 20 pages of mechanics, right? And then we're going to give you the 220 pages of setting that you're going to wrap it in. A-State by Contested Ground Studios. Are you familiar with that one?
I'm not.
They also made Dark City. A-State I consider to be one of the best settings I think I've ever read. And a vast majority of the book is setting. All of the rules for that game fit on I think it's 20, 25 pages of a 200 and something page book.
Okay, sure.
And the rest is pure setting information. Here's all the context within which you use these rules to figure out what happens to these crazy people that are in the setting that you make up.
I was not a playtester, but I have to imagine that GURPS Discworld is going to be similar. They've got something like a GURPS Lite maybe in the front, and then hundreds of pages of, hey, isn't it cool to live on the disc?
Right. I think that uh, that a lot of procedural complexity will take a lot of pages, but there are other kinds of complexity in a game that might drive up the page count without necessarily relating to that.
Right. You know, it almost seems to me also, now that you've coined perhaps the term procedural complexity, that like in the games, I remember thinking as I was playing Gumshoe and Trail of Cthulhu,
Yep.
that because I could spend a point or two or three of investigative points and turn a non-player character from scenery into a critical plot point,
Yeah.
that actually could potentially offload a lot of narrative complexity onto the game master.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden it's like, you know, Spike the vampire was supposed to die and he was going to die, but the audience loved him so much, now you have to write a whole season around him.
Right. Yeah, Gumshoe is actually, like, Gumshoe is deceptive. I'm not going to say deceptive. That's not the right word. It is surprising in that way to me, that it is actually, I mean, I think that it in certain ways it requires the GM to be on it,
Yeah.
on their toes.
That was my impression, is you really need a good GM to...
Right.
Yeah.
Like, just as much as old basic RP Call of Cthulhu did, or whatever, right? I think you need, like, it privileges a strong GM role, and like I've said, surprisingly so for how thin the rule set actually is, because there's a lot of stuff that the GM is managing besides, like I said, how procedurally difficult the rules are to use.
Right. No, I agree. So I'd like to change direction a little bit and talk
Sure.
a ton about Fate.
Okay.
And get into the, you know, and just so the people who may be watching, I always give at least an outline of what we'll talk about to the people that I interview, because I think it's fair. I'm not looking for gotchas. I'm a booster.
Right.
Not a gotcha journalist, and calling me a journalist, I don't know, maybe that's an insult, don't know. But I do want to talk about Fate a little bit, give you a chance to talk about the system. And
Yeah.
so I play and write for GURPS, mostly. I'm been playing the system 20 years or whatever, since about 1989 or 88.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I got steered to the Kickstarter by a co-author or co-conspirators, Anthony Monros, during the Kickstarter, supported it, liked it, have the books behind me. But I'd like to take a little tour, and I downloaded the Fate Accelerated, and
Yep.
one of the issues that I think Sean Punch would readily agree is a problem, or at least a challenge in GURPS, is the cinematic superhero that is fiction forward, that his powers change with the issue at hand.
Right.
Sometimes Superman is laid low by something, and then the next it's a trivial thing, and his X-ray vision defeats it, or whatever.
Right.
And so, when you have stories that are really defined by the will of the writer, rather than the caliber of the gun, the velocity of the bullet, or the speed of the boat, and so when you have stuff like that, and you have something that's basically rooted in reality, a character like Thor.
Yeah.
From the recent movie, I don't have a lot of experience with the comics, but I found myself unreasonably entertained by that movie. I own it. I can watch it over and over. Maybe it's because it's gorgeous. Maybe it's
Thor is a gorgeous movie.
and maybe it's because I could watch Anthony Hopkins do anything. And having him as Odin is I'm not sure if Anthony Hopkins was Odin or Odin is Anthony Hopkins.
He just has a Shakespeare button that he turns on, I think.
I know, and when you combine it with Kenneth Branagh, who was poking that button at appropriate times,
Right.
it seemed to work. But one of the things is I was reading through Fate, I remember thinking, my God, I would have the hardest time statting up Mjolnir in GURPS. What are its powers, how defined is it, whatever. And in Fate, I'm like, blah, blah, blah. Oh, Mjolnir's an aspect.
Yeah.
And you can invoke it for almost anything.
Yeah.
So I wanted to walk through Fate Accelerated, with my little printout. And so I did this little research. I walked through and said, All right, so if I were to walk through character generation in Fate Accelerated, and Fate Accelerated reminds me a lot of the old West End games Star Wars.
Yes!
I once,
Yes, it should.
yeah, I once took 15 people simultaneously through character generation in an hour, and we were playing in an hour and 15 minutes, fighting the evil empire.
That makes me happy. That makes me really happy. Star Wars D6 when I was a teenager was totally, that was it. Star Wars D6, the early World of Darkness stuff, Over the Edge, Feng Shui, that stuff. But Star Wars D6 is in the 90s the thing that I played the most, right? And most of what I learned about what I like about RPGs in play and in design, I learned playing Star Wars D6. So that influence is a very conscious influence and has been a conscious influence on me as a designer going forward since then, and I'm glad that someone noticed because, yes.
I mean, it was a great game, and one of the best campaigns that I ever ran was in D6 Star Wars. I was kind of disappointed when it went over to D20. Because the thing that I loved about it is it was just so straightforward, and
Yeah.
it didn't matter. That's the thing. That's the great thing about Star Wars is when you're playing a universe that is so operatic.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about how many kilobleams of energy the blaster does. You
Right.
go pew 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 and you swing across the chasm and you swing your lightsabers and whatever. The only thing that I ever made fun of, and I was the only Gen Con that I ever was at, was Timothy Zahn and the Star Wars D6 guys. And I was like, the way that I read these rules, it's easier to reflect a blaster bolt back at somebody than to actually hit them with the lightsaber at point blank range. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, my players have kind of found that. They never actually hit people with the sabers because you got the chop off your own arm thing, but you just encourage them to shoot you with the blaster and you can reflect it back and it's a 5 difficulty and it's easy. He's
So
like,
that's a good observation about the whole fiction forward versus, I don't want to say versus because I don't think they're in competition necessarily, but we'll say versus because why not?
sure.
Fiction forward versus pseudophysics, right? Like that rule in Star Wars D6 where it's like if you roll 10 or less on the lightsaber roll, you self-injure, right?
Right.
And that was the rule, right? That's why it was easier to reflect a blaster bolt back at somebody because you just had to roll higher than their roll, and if they rolled crappy, then there were times where it literally could have been easier. So then that's one of those things where, fiction forward, you would ask the question, in a story about Jedi, does anyone ever injure themselves with their lightsaber? Is that something that we see in the fiction ever, right? And everyone would go, no, that's ridiculous, right? Or whatever. And then you're like, okay, well, then that's not going to happen in the film.
Right. Even Han Solo was able to do a little tauntaun-ectomy.
Right.
Without...
But that said, in the Star Wars games that I played, there were people who just did not carelessly run around swinging a lightsaber who arguably had no business carrying one because that rule was in effect, right? So there's both types of constraints can affect the conversation at the table in certain ways.
No, and there's both Rule Zero, the game, the fun is key and the game master sets the scene, and the actual rules of the game, there were just a couple things that one could do if it ever became an issue to make that not happen. But anyway, back to Thor. Although
Sorry,
Thor. No, don't apologize because I'll talk about West End D6 forever because it's one of the games that I would just reach for and go play.
Yeah, me too. Totally.
And you just throw it together, and I actually wrote. I was starting to write some fiction back then about it, and it was just Anyway, I would digress, and this is where Doug forgets that the interview isn't about him. So. And I occasionally do that because I do like to talk.
Well, and if you're ever interested, so here's a hack for you. So Star Wars D6, if you ever want to add aspects from Fate into Star Wars D6, right? Expending a character point, right? Invoking the aspect makes more of your dice wild or does the reroll.
Okay.
Right? And I don't remember what the term is in D6. They had a term for dice that can only explode in the positive direction, not the negative direction.
Back when I played, that I don't remember exploding dice from first edition.
Yeah, no, it was something it was in second edition and then in revised and expanded. The
Okay.
wild die could explode both ways, right? So 6, you re-roll the wild die. Like there was always a wild die in your dice pool, and so when you roll a 6 on it, you always re-rolled. And if you rolled a 1 on it, you took that die and your next highest die away from your roll. So it could be bad luck, and it could be bad luck or good luck.
Interesting.
And then later on, they introduced in other D6 stuff dice that could only explode well and dice that could only explode badly. So replacing your dice with positive wild dice or whatever is a Star Wars D6 hack that I've done before.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And
works cool.
You know, it's funny that the aspects, the invoking aspects and stuff, how, Sean Punch deliberately wrote impulse buys to have the feel of invoking an aspect or spending a character point or whatever, so that you could physically grab onto the plot and bend it to your will.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk Fate Accelerated.
Yes.
High concept. Well, God of Thunder seems fairly straightforward.
Totally.
And for my trouble, arrogant to the point of foolhardiness seems about right.
Yeah, totally. I would. I'm in favor of short, punchy aspect names. So, I would probably say something along the lines of, arrogant beyond measure, or more arrogant than confident, maybe, is something that I would say is a trouble. But whatever.
No, and actually, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Is I'll say something, you're like, this is how, in my experience with Fate, in writing the game and designing it, this is a way to approach this that either a novice can embrace or an expert can say, yes, I've learned something. In my time in doing martial arts, we've got Grandmaster Taejin Lee and his father, Supreme Grandmaster Juban Lee. And one of the things that I noticed about them and their level of expertise is that, and the two of them were very different people, but Grandmaster Lee, the younger one, would make the difficult look easy.
Right.
Whereas his father would make the simple profound. And so you could go in either direction with mastery. And so that's kind of, I'm going to say, okay, I've read the book, I've read Fate Accelerated once, I'm going to talk about Thor, this is what I do, and please layer onto that, say, oh, this is not what I do, or this is what I would do. Here's a way to make it even cooler, because Peter Del Orto, who wrote GURPS Martial Arts, likes to talk about the rule of awesome.
Yeah.
If it's not awesome, stop doing it. And so all of it is about making it more awesome, because then you get stories that maybe will pull in that guy who might be watching Monday Night Football and say, hey, come kill orcs with me or something, and have that be not something where you get shoved into a locker.
Right. Well, with aspects, like, the key is... Like, really, the key to making good aspects is really just the same key as leveraging the power of language in general, right? Like, the more stuff you can express in the fewest words, I think the better you are, right? So, like, arrogant to the point of what was it? Arrogance?
Foolhardiness.
Arrogant to the point of foolhardiness. That's a fine aspect. It's a totally fine aspect. It's clear. I know what it means. I know how it's going to get in your way. It's perfectly playable, right? The variant that I said was more arrogant than confident. So that tells me two things about the character, right? So arrogant to the point of foolhardiness tells me one thing about the character, that they're arrogant to the point of foolhardiness. More arrogant than confident tells me two things about the character. A, that they're arrogant and that it's to an extreme, and B, that they use it to cover up for when they're not as sure of themselves, right? Which I would say is accurate to Thor. So that's what the discussion part is for. Like, when you make up your aspects, like when you talk in Fate Core. Well, hold on. I know in your outline there's a future question about how would this be different in Fate Core. So I'm
So
gonna,
have that right now. That's great.
okay, fair enough. In Fate Core, there's more of a detailed process than there is in Fate Accelerated, where you engage the rest of the people at the table in a conversation about what you're doing with your character in this particular phase. So if you're choosing your trouble and you're like, hey, I want this guy to be really freaking arrogant, and here's my aspect, it's, you're directed to open it up to the table to go, all right, what do you guys think about this? And somebody else at the table might go, well, do they use arrogance to cover up for the fact that they have a confidence problem? Do they overcompensate with their arrogance? And you're like, yes, that's what I do. I overcompensate with my arrogance. Maybe that's the aspect. Now you have that one, right?
Right.
And that aspect is interesting sort of too, because overcompensate for what? Right? And so then we have new questions to ask. But this is the same type of stuff that that fiction writers do. This is the same type of stuff that that playwrights do when they leave stage directions that are vague, right? Like this is the same the process of engaging language that you would do in any other written medium. So it's not specific to making aspects, but aspects are just language.
So I spent a summer at Actors Theater of Houston as doing a stage manager.
Awesome. That's totally awesome.
It was stage crew, right?
Yeah.
It turns out I was a little naughty in my college career and had to do some community service. And I went there and they're like, you need to scrub toilets. And I'm like, okay. And then someone wasn't there and I'm like, I can be your stage guy, your stage hand for the day. And they're like, if you're going to do that, you have to keep doing it. I'm like, dude, Rice University, Rice players, I know a lot of them. Show must go on. I'm there. And so I became a fixture there and eventually was stage manager. But the process that you talk about was exactly what the cast would go through. It wasn't, okay, I'm just playing a part in You Never Can Tell.
Right.
Who was your father? What did they do? And what were your parents like? And what was your job? And this is so you could deliver 12 lines.
Right.
And so it sounds like the influence in your Fate Core and Fate Accelerated, less so, but Fate Core especially, is really almost method acting 101.
Well, it is to some degree, but with the proviso that in Fate, you're given the flexibility to discover your character also. So it's less about, like say you have this aspect, like your trouble. Let's say you have a character that's a veteran that gets put back into service. Like you're a veteran that becomes a mercenary, let's say, after some war, right? And your trouble aspect is scars from the war, right?
Sure.
I don't need to know what happened in the war for you to have those scars, and maybe you don't either when you start playing the character. But as we play the game, more and more of that comes out, and it changes how you view your own characters. So you don't have to do it as homework the way that you do it as an actor building a character. But on the other hand, the idea that you're leveraging the power of text to give you insight into who the person is, like you do when you're studying a play or whatever, that part of it I would say tracks, sure.
No, that's cool. I mean, and one of the things that I've done this, and I've seen people do it even in GURPS games, is either leave a pool of character points unspent,
right?
Or so hey, I need to sneak down this hallway. Well, it would be really awesome if I could.
Right.
It would be profoundly non-awesome if the game just stops here because I have no default. I'm defaulting to stealth. Which,
right.
And so I think there's an aspect of getting into the character over the course of days, months, and years that
right.
for great gaming stories. And so I totally get what you're getting. The method active thing was really just to provoke a reaction. So I sort of apologize for that, sort of not.
But it was sort of successful.
All right, there you go.
So there you go.
So aspects, 3 aspects. Sure. I think, at least in my opinion, the defining aspect is Mjolnir, the hammer.
Yeah.
He flies with it, he fights with it, he throws it and it comes back, he does
right.
this cool spinny thing that kicks up dirt and makes people go away.
Right, so if I may,
Yeah, please.
Mjolnir, the source of my power.
There we go.
Right?
There we go.
Because without the hammer...
He's nothing. Or he's less.
Nothing, right? So now that there's a double edge on that, right? So like, it has all that power and you can invoke it for your advantage and you do everything with it, but now there's a way for compels regarding that to come into the fiction, puts a double edge on it, so there's that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's a really interesting kind of catch-22 is, you know, whomever holds the hammer has the power of Thor, so is Thor mighty because he holds the hammer, or is it because he happens to be a character who's worthy of holding the hammer, and therefore he is Thor?
And with the aspect, the actual play of the game can explore both.
Yep, that's really cool. And then I guess since you can have 2 or 3 in Fate Accelerated, 2 or 3 aspects to start with, I thought that by the end of the Avengers movie that a second aspect might be self-appointed protector of Earth.
Sure.
You know, and in GURPS you'd call it sense of duty to all of Earth and maybe get points for it. But so would that be?
I love that. I love that. And so leveraging the power of language, right?
Yep.
Self-appointed protector of Earth. How does everybody on Earth feel about that? Self-appointed, right? Like, so that could bring him into conflict with people who consider themselves the authoritative protectors of Earth, like S.H.I.E.L.D., right? So what happens when Thor wants to do something for the good of humanity that S.H.I.E.L.D. is like, maybe that's not what's actually for the good of humanity, so there's perspective conflict that can happen on that, right? Protector of Earth comes with a strong sense of duty and obligation, so, like, I'm mainly teasing that out as a demonstration of what I mean by leveraging the power of language. That every word you use, everything that you say, like you could have said protector of Earth, and that would have a certain meaning as an aspect, and it would still carry a sense of duty and it's still playable or whatever. But then you're like self-appointed protector of Earth, and it's like, hold on. So that brings in another angle of it that, like, the part of that aspect that could become relevant to the fiction could be the protector of Earth part. It could be the self-appointedness, right? Like you have options there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's punchy. That's punchy as hell. I would even consider that to maybe be a better high concept than God of Thunder.
That's fair, especially in the context where Thor is mostly depicted in the comics in relatively modern times.
Right.
His role as God of Thunder is
diminished
and background.
Right.
You know, it's you get to wear the cool cape and have the lightning powers and stuff. But that's just part of his aspect.
Right.
I wonder how you get to Mjolnir, source of my power and symbol of the thunder god or something, so that you tie that in and then the high concept replaces, because the whole God of Thunder motif is important.
Right. Yeah.
But not quite as defining to his actions as to the cool stuff that he can do.
Right. Well, you could put it as, like, another way to frame that same aspect would be, I wear the mantle of the God of Thunder.
Ooh.
Right? So, like, that's a way of, if you don't want to put Mjolnir, like, I personally would put Mjolnir as its own aspect, because I want to put Mjolnir on camera a bunch because Mjolnir is awesome.
Right.
But if you wanted to it's all about, so this is another thing, so language, right? Selection of detail, emphasis, right? Like, what aesthetically are we interested in? What do we care about? If your perception of Mjolnir is that it is a symbol of this larger set of trappings, right? Then you don't have to name it. You can say, I wear the God of Thunder's mantle. And that means I have Mjolnir as part of what I'm expected to have. I have a relationship with the Asgardians and with other cosmic beings that I'm expected to have. And that's how you emphasize it, right? Or you can put Mjolnir, the source of my power, because what matters to you is putting that hammer on camera and showing what happens when the bad guys take it away, or it gets limited, or he can't use it, or... Right, like the aspects taken as a whole are you can look at them as like a promise of selection of detail about your character. Right.
Right. You know, I almost wonder if, thinking about it, that one of the aspects that we haven't yet defined should be something like, and I'll something like, heir to the throne of Asgard, comma, found wanting.
Right.
Right, because at least in the movie, one of the things I found compelling about the movie was he started with this arrogance, and then he had that great scene where Odin cast him out, and he realizes that he's got a long way to go, and
right.
for immortal, that's a long, long, long way.
Right.
So he knows he's supposed to ascend to the throne one day, and he should reset that to some indefinite, maybe infinite time in the future.
Right.
So there's this infinite proving ground he has to go through, and that would seem to define him in an important way.
Yeah, that would be an aspect that I would the first thing that came to my mind to hit it as simply as I could is I'm not ready to lead yet. Nice. And because that can influence his current circumstances as well. If he's thrust into a position of leadership, that's something that can create self-doubt and
Right. But you're not king.
Right. Not yet. Right.
Bill Anthony. Okay.
But see, now you want to play this dude, right? I do. What's happening, right? So that's part of what the conversation is about, like leveraging the power of language, right? Like when you're figuring out your aspects, right? Like the key is to really figure out, like, what am I invested in about this guy? Like, what about playing this guy is gonna interest me? And tuning the aspects to that.
Right.
Right. The very, very worst thing that you can do is take an aspect that you're not passionate about, playing out all of the ramifications that it might suggest. It's better to leave it blank, right? If you were like, man, I don't really know what I want my character to be about, then I'm like, all right, God of Thunder, more arrogant than confident, Mjolnir, let's go. Right?
Sure.
But if you get involved in the longer conversation and you're like, man, I'm really interested in this idea that he's not ready to be a leader yet, yada, 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 and that's something that I would find interesting about the character, put it on the page, right? That's I mean, like I said, that's really the key to making good aspects. Leverage the power of language and follow your heart. I mean, it sounds really zen and like, I mean, it doesn't probably not zen to you because you study martial arts and like understand flow in a certain way, like not just muscle memory, but like mental muscle memory and like, but yeah, like follow your impulses, your creative impulses, right? Follow your heart, follow what you find aesthetically interesting about the character, dig deep. Right. Like that's really how you get like the best aspects.
And one of the things that I find interesting is I remember one of my best man when my wedding, my best friend in high school, he role played with us, but he wasn't into it the way that others were. And he would show up and he would play these great brute characters who were really good at just thrashing stuff. And that's what he showed up to do, is kill and dismember people in interesting ways.
Yeah.
And that is every bit as much a valid character concept, and you could see getting there through. I'm sort of saying I have the kind of the flow chart on my screen so that. But you can see coming up with just someone who's just a bruiser, who's just there to dismember people in interesting ways, as much as you can. This deep angsty is the wrong word, but a deep conflicted social mental.
Right.
It's like we're describing Thor, who could be a beefcake.
Right.
Right. And certainly my wife votes 2 thumbs up for beefcake on both all the Chris's. Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth are both equally digestible, I think, in her eyes, which is a little tough. Although I was Captain America for Halloween, so there you go.
Chris Hemsworth he's a fine piece of man. I'll give you that.
I'm pretty much as straight gets, and when he had that scene in just the jeans, I'm like, wow, I'm totally reconsidering my orientation at this moment.
For real.
I was ripped.
He has the same thing with Daniel when in Casino Royale when Daniel Craig comes up out of the water and he's just like he's an Adonis, like.
Yeah. No, seriously. I went out and bought 2 of those bathing suits, and now I've got at least one child, so it can work.
I did.
Maybe something to edit out. I'm not sure the gaming ballistic viewers really want to hear about my underwear, but we'll see.
Fair enough.
Anyway, moving on, moving into it, because although I'm having a great fun, so
cool.
getting into the approaches,
Yeah.
which is a really neat way, I think, of slimming down. I think I threw down forceful,
Hmm.
primary, flashing and quick for the +2, careful and clever as some of the deprecated, and sneaky. I don't see Thor sneaking
Nope.
into anything.
Not at all.
And so the interesting thing is, and I sent it to you, but I'll talk it.
Right.
Let's look at Loki.
Right is exactly the opposite.
Foil.
Yeah, yeah.
If you start from the bottom and say, okay, sneaky's the best, careful and clever is next best, flashing and quick not so much, and forceful not at all.
Yeah.
Yep, look at that. They are absolutely dramatic foils as defined by your axes.
Yep.
Let me ask you a question about that. Did you guys, when you came up with these approaches, did you guys think of, okay, here's polar, 3 axes with polar opposites, and you've got forceful is the opposite of sneaky or whatever. Did you think about it that way, or how did you come up with those 6?
You're going to have to talk to Clark Valentine about that because he was the lead developer for Accelerated.
Okay.
My role on Accelerated was to make core. Like, I made the thing for him to derive Accelerated from. What I will say is, when I got the draft and I looked at those 6 things, I thought of them in terms of pairs. Flashy versus careful. And so on. Forceful versus clever.
Sure.
Right? Like, I certainly looked at them that way, and I think that Clark did an amazing job of distilling sort of how a great summary list of how people do stuff that's very adaptable, right? Because that's what approaches are. They're how you do stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah. No, and that was actually one of my favorite campaign settings for GURPS, and I'm not really bringing it back to GURPS other than the fact that it's kind of my Rosetta Stone. When I was trying to explain to my players, and I never made them learn the system, and especially with Black Ops, which was 700 points or 1,000 points or whatever it was.
Yeah, I remember.
Don't do that to people. It's just not nice. Learn the system and assign 1,000 of these discrete units, which, by the way, in 3rd edition could be discrete. 2,000 half-point choices, right? If you really
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But what I said is, don't think of the combat op and the intel op and all those guys. Don't think of that as a job. Think of it as an approach.
Right. Yeah.
The combat op is going to go let's just kill stuff. Let's blow stuff up. The intel op was not going to. They might still blow stuff up, but they do it in a sneaky way.
Right.
Indirect conflict.
Yeah.
The security op was looking out for everybody. The science op was like, let's understand the bug. To defeat the bug, we must understand the bug.
Right.
And I apologize for all who sat through that movie. And then
I love Starship Troopers. I
enjoyed it. I love the book.
Yeah.
I thought that the movie was more in common with John Stakely's Armor than Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers. But it had Dina Meyer in it, and so I'm always going to rate it very highly.
Fair enough.
I didn't have much use for Denise Richards in that particular role, or she was never one of my. But Dina Meyer, I even thought she was great when she made the guest appearance somewhat recently on, I think it was Bones TV show.
Oh.
And still someone who makes my heart go a little pitter patter. I married a redhead, so I'm easily swayed there.
Fair enough.
All right, stunts. So that was actually a little harder for me to grasp, although the text was there. The only thing that I threw down was kind of, because I am tossing a piece of neutron star around as if it were foam rubber, I get +2 to overcome when I'm trying to move through foes in combat.
Right.
That seems to be one of many that could be extant there. How many stunts does a typical Fate character or an advanced Fate character have? Is it just
like in core?
Sure, whatever. Accelerated core. What's
I think in accelerated you can have up to 3, right? In accelerated.
Sounds right.
In core, It's 3 for free, and
Ah.
then you can get up to 2 more if you spend refresh. So you have 3 stunts and 3 refresh. And if you want, you can get up to 5 stunts and have 1 refresh.
Okay, and is that per session, per day, per?
Well, if you make the choice of character creation, it's permanent. So, like, you have 5 stunts. Like, if you make that choice to max out your stunts, you have 1 refresh permanently per session. Yeah, at the start of the game, and then 5 stunts. And then as you go through the advancement, you get additional refresh as you go.
Okay, so it's kind of like spending a character point to invoke a stunt or whatever.
Right.
You have a certain number of stunts that you can invoke in any given game.
Right.
And it's do you have to choose them ahead of time?
If you
Sorry, let me be more specific.
yeah.
Is it like D&D spells where if you don't memorize your magic missile you can't use it? Do you have to?
No.
No. So it's just you have a number of stunts that you can use and they're whatever they
So
are.
you can use that will. Yeah.
Okay. 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 No. So I want to thank you for that. I think that was a great exploration of what it's like to make a fake character. I now I want to either play or run one of these games, which really is the mission, right? Is get people interested in what's going on.
Can I make one comment about the stunts?
Yeah.
So you're like, I'm not sure what stunts I want to give this guy. So I have this one stunt about him moving through crowds, right? But I'm not sure, right? So stunts to me are really interesting in Fate because a lot of people compare them to feats from like 3rd edition D&D and Pathfinder.
Right.
And I think that comparison is apt, right? They're like the special tricks you can do. I look at them in Fate terms because we're talking about fiction-forward stuff, about what is the moment on camera that you see with this character, right? And I think that stunt selection is best done when you're highlighting what is that moment on camera. So when you thought of that, you're looking at a frame in a movie, right, or a scene in a movie, or a panel in a comic, a shot in a movie, I should say, right, where you see like Thor is like using his hammer to like bull through hordes of enemies, right, or whatever, right? And that's something that you put on the camera in your mind, right? So that's a stunt.
Right.
I think that's an excellent way to approach stunts. The fact that you haven't thought of any more, to me, is an indicator that you're not sure yet what the spotlight moments are for Thor. But that's something that you could easily discover as you play, right?
Right. And also some of it, I'll admit, is he does so much.
So much stuff, right? Like,
he fights with it. He uses it to pave the way. He flies with it.
Right.
I was really thinking of just all the time, because sure, he's going to be invoking it constantly to just beat people down, and that's what he does, and he throws it all cool and stuff, and it comes back to him. But I was really thinking about to overcome or to move through foes. I was really thinking just a lot about the mass of the thing.
Yeah.
Although obviously the stuff that he does with the hammer is pretty cool.
Right.
Okay, so I wanted to go from creation to a little bit to the future. So
Okay.
the future. I'll pretend that there's a tie in there somewhere. But really, I want the Kickstarter was hugely successful.
Yeah.
Was it the most successful role-playing Kickstarter? No.
It was well. It depends. In terms of dollar amounts, no. But I believe that we are the highest or one of the highest populated Kickstarters in terms of number of backers.
Okay.
So we had over 10,000 backers. 3,000 and change of them have started a Google Plus community. That is awesome. And I want to give them a shout out because I love you guys.
I joined it recently, actually.
Sweet. There's a lot of great discussion happening over there. More than I'm very happy for the Google Plus ability to tag people in posts, because now I feel like when anyone needs me, they can send up the bat signal.
Right.
Plus, Leonard Balsera, please comment, so that I don't feel the massive weight of obligation to try and keep up with that group and how quickly they shift through discussions and all the awesome creative stuff they're doing. So kudos to Google. But I think we're one of the most populated RPG Kickstarters. I know Monty Cook's Numenera had a larger dollar amount than we did.
Okay.
But I don't think that they had as many backers as we did.
Yeah, I saw a funny picture of President Obama. Someone had photoshopped Numenera.
Yeah.
Okay, so
there is a non-Photoshop picture of LeVar Burton holding a copy of Fate Accelerated.
That is kind of awesome. People keep telling me that I need to have Will Wheaton on this, and I was like, I'm sure that he'll get right on that. But I know he's a great guy, and he does a lot to promote gaming and tabletop and all that stuff, and I enjoy his work on Big Bang Theory, of course. But they're like, you got to interview Will Wheaton. I'm like, he's got 1 million followers on Google. I'm not sure I'm going to stand out on that one.
You want me to ask him?
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've met him. Well, hold on. I would not say I capital K know him. That would be disingenuous. I have met him a few times, and we have acquaintances in common, and I've hung out with him. Like, he played in a game of Fate Core with Ryan Macklin ran it, and he got to play in a game with Ryan and Lillian Cohen-Moore and Clark and Amanda Valentine at Gen Con, and I got to stop in and say hi and sign his Fate Core book, and that was really totally awesome. Will is totally awesome. But I mean, I'm gonna ask him.
Absolutely, and part of this is just, it's I guess is all that I would say is, if he were gonna consider this, I would encourage him to see the now 3, including yourself, interviews that I've done. There will hopefully be another one next month with Ken. And if he feels that this would be a platform that he can use, awesome. If he's like, I've got my own show and I can do better, that's awesome too. So it's really about boosting the hobby, which is why I do this.
Yeah.
Kickstarter, back again. I want you to brag a bit. What's coming? What's in progress? And since we've talking a little bit about Ken, tell me a little bit about the day after Ragnarok.
Okay. So what's next for me in terms of all the Kickstarter stuff is Dresden Files Accelerated, which is a Dresden Files RPG that uses the Fate Accelerated engine that I'm very, very, very much looking forward to.
Have you started work?
No, not yet. Work starts in January, but we have our team, and it's a fantastic team. And
I'm a manager of research and development when I'm not dressed up as a costume superhero, and the team is so key.
Yeah.
My team will never watch what I'm doing because role playing is, well, maybe one of them will, but I got a great team. I love my team, and there's nothing that, given the right resources and the right path, that they can't accomplish.
Yeah.
You have a group of people around you who are like, go create, and they're like, yes, I will do that. It's a great feeling, whether it's fiction or science.
Yeah. I'm really, really excited about the team that we have. So that's that for me. That is the last of the Kickstarter stretch goals. So we have Young Centurions coming out, which is a sort of a young adult fiction inspired Spirit of the Century in the same universe as Spirit of the Century kind of game for Fate Accelerated that's coming out.
Roman Centurions, or?
Well, so Spirit of the Century, the people that are the members of the Century Club, the Centurions.
So
it's set in the same universe. That is there's a novel by Carrie Harris that's going to be coming out, Sally Slick and the Steel Syndicate, or Sally Slick versus the Steel Syndicate. Someone's probably going to kick me later for not getting that correct.
Your power of alliteration is impressive.
Yeah. Well, I know the Steel Syndicate part. I just don't remember what the conjunction is right in the middle. And that's like a young adult novel that has Sally Slick in it as the main character, and teenage Sally Slick sort of dealing with stuff. So that's cool. Young Centurions is coming out along that line. Shadow of the Century is on its way. I'm a big fan of Shadow of the Century because I'm not on its development team, which means I get to cheer from the sidelines and rah-rah and be its fan and playtest. And we have amazing people on that. Atomic Robo, Mike Olson's Atomic Robo, based on the comic by Brian Clevenger, is on its way, and that's awesome. And Dresden Falls Accelerated, like I said, was the last of the Kickstarter stretch goals, and that's going to be my thing next year. And
if you could get any license and write it personally, what would you do?
If I could get any license to write it personally, oh man, I don't know.
Okay.
Assassin's Creed.
Oh. Yes. Okay. I've not played, but I know how popular it is, and I see Assassin's Creed costumes at Renaissance Festival.
Yeah.
And people smile and nod rather than are smarmy and evil when they
Right.
see that. So so I could see where that would be fun.
Yeah. No, I would in a heartbeat. I would do that project in a heartbeat. People from Ubisoft, if you are listening, I would develop that game in a heartbeat. All right. I would not even wait for the heartbeat to finish. I would just do it.
In between heartbeats, you would have.
In between heartbeats, I would develop that game. So Dresden Falls Accelerated is coming. I personally am going to be working on the Fate conversion of a game called Red Aegis, which was a Kickstarted project that is its own system, but one of the stretch goals was a conversion for Fate Core. And I have been tapped to do that, so I'm looking forward to doing that. And Red Aegis, the cool thing that is going on with that game is that it's a generational game. So like it's not just about playing the one hero; it's about playing like a generation of heroes over time.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So you have like bits of it where it's like, the hero has to find his mate and then have the next generation of heroes and carry on the line. That kind of generational.
Yeah, that kind of generational. I don't know how exactly they're incorporating it into gameplay, if they handle the actual ascent of generation between sessions or whatever they're gonna do, but like, but that's the idea is that it's an epic that spans multiple generations of heroes, right? And it's designed that way from the ground up.
That's really interesting because it would give you a chance to play a bunch of different characters in sequence, and to have each one be influenced by the one before.
Right.
That's neat.
It's neat. It's been done once very effectively. A friend of mine, Tim Kopang, did a game called Heroes Banner, which was a small press game, 2007, 2008, I think is when it came out. That was that handled that concept also, and I said great. I think it's great. I'm glad that like other people are exploring that idea too. But while I'm giving shout outs, Heroes Banner, it's an awesome game. Cool. So I'm going to be working on that. That's sort of like the state of the fate for me and for Evil Hat for the at least for the next year.
Sure. So Day After Ragnarok? Is that
Day After Ragnarok? Day After Ragnarok's out now.
Okay.
So Day After Ragnarok is Ken Height's brilliant alternate history, post-apocalypse, military fiction, sci-fi, pulp, high. There's so many genres. That man can just mix genres like no one else can, I think.
I'm going to do a lot of research before I talk to him, I think.
Yes. Yes. That is true. You don't really though. You just have to surrender to the scope and power of his knowledge about everything.
Yeah.
And just let him talk.
And I'm okay with that. There's a communication principle that I was taught when I was a consultant at McKinsey called release your agenda,
Yes.
which is, and that's why I say, this outline that I have and that we've actually done awesome on is all well and good, but if you decided that you wanted to talk about something else, your interview.
Right.
And that's actually just to close it out a little bit. Is there anything that you want to say that you haven't had a chance to chat about? State of the industry. People you'd like to meet, whatever.
Well,
right?
hold on. I wanted to give you the tiny sales pitch on Day After Ragnarok.
Oh, go, yeah.
Yeah, Day After Ragnarok is so the premise behind it is the actual literal Norse Ragnarok interrupts World War II. Right.
Let's just start small.
So,
two huge events. That's right. Awesome.
So World War II is happening, and then all of a sudden, the Midgard serpent shows up and starts wreaking havoc on the world. We're forced to detonate the Trinity device to blow it up, and we managed to halt the Norse Ragnarok by killing the world serpent with the Trinity device. But doing that leaves the world in a blighted state because of the destruction that the serpent had wrought, and it's people sort of it's cleaning up after the world that both World War II and the literal Norse Ragnarok left behind.
What are the major plot points?
Well, it depends. There are several different types of campaigns that are in the setting in the book that you could run. So a lot of it is like, what are you interested in playing? Like, are you interested in playing people who like roam in the most irradiated bits of the whatever, and help out the people that are like sort of caught up in the most blighted wastelands? Are you in that group of people who are trying to do scientific research in order to like help bring the world back to what it was? Are you people that have taken shelter in some of the cities that are left, and there are a lot of different campaigns that are proposed by the book.
Do the Asgardians actually figure in it, or not so much?
Yes, there is a mention in the book about more things coming down from the mountains, right? Like now that this has happened, the Aesir and the Vanir and the giants, right? Like they come down from the steppes, in Russia and that kind of stuff, and we see them. It's a grab bag of amazing. It's right. It's an intersection of Norse mythology and early 20th century pulp grit, and it was a great playground to be in, and all I got to do was convert it to Fate. I got to do the fiction forward version of that and tease out like the bits that I think are really thematically interesting about that setting, and it was a great opportunity to play in Kent's Playground, and I think that everyone should have it.
No, I mean it seems to me that it would probably in a concept that rich would be a bit of a mistake to try and get into the metaphysics of it. It seems like right?
There's a hero system version of it. Because here's the interesting thing. So military fiction as a genre. Right?
Good point.
Like privileges or can privilege a lot of that kind of stuff. And so that element is definitely in there too. I think the Fate conversion doesn't deal with that side of it as much, but certainly it's there, right? Like there's it's out right now for Savage Worlds Hero System and Fate Core, which I think is awesome, and is a testament to how robust that setting is, right? Because I think all of the versions that you can play it in are play to its strengths in one way or another as a setting. So
Cool. So last thing, the floor is yours. Do you want to close out with any comments or challenges or state of the industry or state of Leonard Balsera or?
I just want to no, I mean I just want to say that like the fact that people are asking me to do shows like this is something that gives me a lot of gratitude. Like, I'm very grateful that people are into Fate, and I'm very grateful that people's gaming has been enriched by it, and I'm glad I had something to offer. I mean, that's all I've got, and I think that the media trend, the gaming media trend of being able to do shows like this on Hangouts, where it's like live and on the air, and you can have a TV show about gaming, effectively speaking, and you can just do it from your living room, is badass.